We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and I'm Bill Correll here with my podcast buddyette, Jan Jeremias, and we just enjoy talking to each other. I guess we should probably just record everything that we say. You know that every once in a while there's some real nuggets there, but we're almost always talking about things that'll make the world a better place, or just our kind of a take on something that either you or I experienced, and we want to share it with each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, um, with that in mind, I would like to open with maybe just a general discussion on the podcast that I listened to the first 41 minutes of, and um, I was kind of you can remember the who was in it and the names of people better than I can.
Mhm.
But the podcast was interviewing a clinical psychologist, as I understand, and possibly even a psychiatrist, um, on a new sort of take on what I think she called was toxic positivity, and that struck me in a couple of different ways. It struck me, first of all, like this is just another academic phrase to hook people in and sell them the same old whatever. And I found the podcaster was kind of like a cheerleader, like, yeah baby, it's just bullshit, right? Yeah, well, now hang on. It's called, like, if you read the first chapter of something and then you think you understand it and know it. Power of positive thinking, going all the way back to day one, had nothing to do with creating a better outcome. It had everything to do with creating a better now while you're uncertain of what the outcome is going to be. And so what they were talking about wasn't what most people who have put time and effort into understanding the language and the studies of possibility and all that sort of thing. What they were talking about is what people were saying who really didn't know their backside from a hole in the ground, saying, well, you'd probably get over your cancer much more quickly if you just had a positive attitude. And there is nothing in anything that I've ever read that said there's a law of attraction which could be conflated with being positive. But where it kind of broke down was that this was earth shattering, and it just kind of smacked a little bit. And I've got to listen to the rest of it to be fair. But there were points that were being made that I really agreed with, and then there were points that were being made that I thought to myself, this is relanguaging something in order to attract people, like it's something new and different. But it really isn't anything new and different. And I think any psychiatrist or psychologist worth their salt will tell people that while you're waiting to die, it's a lot different experience if you have an outlook on life that this is just what's going on, but you still have a great life.
First of all, the Dr. Susan David, to my knowledge, is a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and she was being interviewed by Brene Brown, and Brene Brown is a emotions researcher, so she has a doctorate, and so she is doing research, and she's done some amazing, I think, studies and everything, as well as in addition to being very a prolific writer, and then also podcaster and interviewer and speaker and
Sure.
things like that. So, I think she was coming in from it, with a knowledge base of knowing exactly what, saving Susan David's work, and also current emotions research and what's out there as far as like what's, now being, people believe in that kind of realm of research and, I don't know,
Okay.
wisdom, like kind of thing. But I think what I took from it was, I don't know if she was saying, because I don't know how far exactly you got. So I don't know that she's saying being positive is bad. I think what she's saying is people tend to try to rush through what they're feeling, not truly experience it, and then
Yes.
just try to cover it up with positivity.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can speak from personal experience from saying, "Oh my gosh, I shouldn't feel like that because that it's crazy for me to feel like that. Like, why should I be jealous of so and so? That's
Right.
not a good emotion. I should really just eradicate that and erase that from my being."
Yes.
Or, you know, "Oh, don't worry, things will get whatever." It's the things we tell ourselves sometimes to kind of make ourselves feel better, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just to me, it's a bad thing if you don't spend any time in the emotion trying to process whatever happened. Then it's like, because basically eventually you have to deal with whatever it is. If it keeps on coming up all the time, you either have to come to some sort of peace with it, you have
Yes.
to come with some sort of acceptance, you have to do something about it. Or so like this whole idea of brushing it off and making believe you're okay when you're not okay
Right.
can be detrimental. I think that that's where she was going, you
I
know.
got that. I got that. But they spent quite a bit of time really kind of fleshing out toxic positivity, which is, in my opinion, is a bullshit term, because in order to have a conversation that meant anything, I don't even have the first chapter done for me to be able to disagree with it. And which brings me to another question: what are they really talking about? And why is it important to always name something for the listener to have to learn? You know what I'm saying? I took from it exactly what you're saying right now, and you're explaining it in the King's English with no need to impress me. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah, I
so
mean, I think they were coming at it from 2 science geeks, which I get, like that kind of
nobody
researcher
else in the
kind
room
of.
kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, sometimes I think that they were some of the data and some of the things, like, they even said, "Oh, we're geeking out here," because that's, like, their research and their passion. Um, I I think that some of what she said, if I remember correctly, and listen to the podcast, everybody, because I don't wanna, like, misquote. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
this is what I heard, was the fact that children who kind of sit with whatever's wrong as opposed to, or people that kind of process their emotions, not saying they're not positive, but kind of look at their emotions and whatever's there, the emotional landscape, tend to be able to, what she calls, become more emotionally agile, meaning they're better, probably, they might be better at adapting to different circumstances and to change and to different things that come into their life, where people who kind of put a happy face on, even though when things are not that great, have been shown in their research not to have as it sounds like, don't cope as well.
I agree, and I there that's a premise that's not new. Okay, what I'm it was entertaining to listen to two, obviously really well trained, very committed people in their field, talking to each other and geeking out. And part of what I was feeling was a little bit in some cases at a loss for the jargon, and thinking that um, the value that I'm getting out of this has a lot more to do with how these two ladies are supporting each other, um, with their careers and being in what would typically not be a female dominated line of work. And I heard, like that going on in the background, which I really support. I think anytime a human being can support somebody else who needs it, that's exactly like being present to the issue that's bothering you and allowing it to be just the issue that's bothering you, and nothing else. Because most of the time, when people are glossing over something, it's their thought that they're glossing over. It's not what's happening. Okay. It's their story about what's happening. And that story takes them over. And quite frankly, people who can distill you know, the senses from the emotional response to what the senses have interpreted, You're absolutely correct. They're stable human beings, more stable, more sturdy, more grounded, um, better looking, all those things, right? So I appreciated that, and I was able to glean most of that because clearly I have to do some more studying on why they keep making up these bogus terms to teach kids in college so they can go around pointing it out in other people. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think we all like, I think every, no matter what you do, I think there is a language, so to speak, like it's always funny to me because I don't know that I really thought about it, but it just like on practical terms, yoga has its own language. When I teach a class, there's words that the normal law layperson would not normally use. And some of them are anatomical parts that you kind of think to yourself, I can't believe I use this in everyday conversation, like armpits, kind of thing. I remember when I was like, just hollow out your armpits. And it was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I used this as a direction, like,
What
and
else
it
would
was
you call them?
right, exactly. But still it was kind of funny, right? And
Right.
so I think that some of that happens, just as normal, like as people learn more, they come up with terms about it. And I'm not sure I totally in some ways disagree with her. Like I said, I do think that
Yeah.
our society tends to, you know, whether that be a lot of times, when it's almost expected that we kind of gloss over things and we don't allow people the space to process. Like people are supposed to like chin up and go out and pretend everything's okay, even though everything's not okay. And
Yes.
somebody may be really hurting and struggling. And I think that part of this gets to be really profound and dynamic when I hear about the numbers of people who are now, suicidal and who are really, really like struggling. And I think to myself, and I think that's why they become like people start to get so analytical, almost brainy about it because they're trying to solve what they believe is a really big problem at this point. And, you
It
know,
is a big problem. Yes.
Yes, and to that end, I mean, and I'm an analytical, so many parts of myself are analytical, but when I started to really become in touch with my emotions, it was really interesting because I felt like a child. I think children sometimes have a very hard time articulating how they're feeling. They act up, but when they're upset, and they might use physical symptoms like their stomach hurts or something like that, which I'm not saying their stomach doesn't hurt, but they don't know how to talk about how they feel. And that's how I felt. I felt like I'm not sure I could describe and pinpoint what this is. I just know that I mean, unless I went in more general terms, like I'm sad, but what was making me sad, I might not have been able to pinpoint. Um, But what was interesting was I could start to feel that in my body, not label it, kind of own it, because if I was feeling it in my body, I was actually processing and kind of saying, okay, this is what's going on. I'm owning this right now. I- And sort of surrender. I like the word surrender. It was like I could surrender up
Yep.
trying to exactly articulate it. And then eventually, maybe after I journaled and after I practiced, if somebody were to talk to me, I could describe it and articulate it better. But there wasn't a need for that for me. I didn't really need to do that first, all of a sudden, have to figure out what to do. It was more or less like, okay, I can feel this and let it truly assimilate it into my body
Yep.
in some way and then say, okay, and then eventually maybe get to this is what that's about kind of thing, like, oh, now I get it. This is what that's really about. And then say, okay, okay, well, what can I do about it? Is there anything I can do about it? Is it something I just, so and so walked out or so and so is no longer speaking to me? Now, how do I feel about that? Is it worth having a really brave conversation and trying to get down to repair that relationship? or that did that person enter my life to teach me something and now I have to just let them go? But it got to the, so there wasn't that need anymore for me.
Yeah, and I really have to tell you, I absolutely love what you're saying and how you're saying it, because the words that you and I would use to metaphorically enlighten somebody else so that they might have a different relationship to what they're feeling. The words that come to mind while you're talking about owning it and then assimilate and that. So there would be, this kind of thing where receive it and accept it. Like it's coming to you. You're now starting to be able to identify it as part of yourself. And that's where the power is, not labeling it something like toxic positivity that gives the power over to somebody else who's being a jerk for not being empathetic when they're with you. And so where I would, be real interested in going further with that is how many other words could you come up with so that you're now able to own, get to an ownership. When you've gotten to the ownership, you presence it. When you presence it, it disappears. It's just how it works.
It
Okay.
does.
You
Well,
don't need, yeah,
sorry
but
about
I'm just saying you don't need to keep changing fancy lingo, to get people to feel like whatever they've learned before. It's like men are from Mars and women are from Venus and all the rest of that. And no, we went through a whole generation where women went around thinking that men are all alike, and we're not. Okay. And I feel like we're going back there again. That whole toxic masculinity. This is a made up bullshit term that's made up by people who hate men. Okay. And they teach people to hate men, and they teach people that the patriarchal society is blah, 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 blah. Well, you know what? Sometimes it is. And guess what? We men live in that patriarchal society too. And it ain't that great for some of us sometimes. So keep going with your metaphors. Don't take 10 years worth of time training a whole generation to go out and call this stuff out when it's not there. It doesn't exist. It's a made up term. And that's what I got plugged in about. Now, I'm going to find, you know me well enough. I'm not going to leave it there where I'm being right about what my first impression was. I'm going to also say it's kind of like I'll flip the script entirely to another whole conversation. I put a meme up on Facebook that basically has a Buddhist monk saying that there's an error in the understanding of the world, in labeling Buddhism a religion. It isn't a religion. Buddhism is at its core not religion. There's no belief system around a supreme being. There is a belief system that you will generate learning more about yourself, whatever it was. And then I got a comment back saying that, because one of the lines in it was, a Christian who also practices Buddhism will be a better Christian. And the woman, responded to me saying, yes, but Buddhism is a religion that believes that there is no God. And my answer back to her was, no, it's not a belief, it's a question. Okay. The question is one that you look at internally to try to describe how you fit into all of this. But the God in it is all of this. It's not located in heaven somewhere and not here. And so the interesting part of all of that is that when people consider Buddhism as a religion, they don't understand why Buddhists in certain parts of Asia are killing Christians. There's this war that goes on using religion as an excuse. But what I've found is whenever there's violence involved or there's taking of a life, it has absolutely nothing to do with the words coming out of the people's mouths. It has everything to do with what's going on inside of them and some kind of a desire to be powerful. Or
the word that came to my mind was power. That's usually it's a
but in essence, they're really not being powerful. They're being forceful. They are actually taking away someone else's free will and they're ending their life. And that's not power. I mean, power is this energy that you and I feel when we get into a subject and we're like, hitting on all eight cylinders, and we could go on like that forever, but we have to end the podcast somewhere, don't we?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
So my concern is, okay, it always comes back to when I ask myself, why am I energized about that? Well, I got two great grandsons. The things they're being taught about what men are and how boys should behave and all that sort of thing at age of 11 and 13, and to tone down their masculinity. It's like, hang on, this world needs more people that are willing to stand up and be for something, not less. We don't need more subservient human beings, men or women. What we
Mhm.
need is more righteous human beings that have a good idea where their compass is pointing, and they're not interested in taking other people's compasses away from them. It's about sharing information, so that people can upgrade the direction that their compass is pointing, without being told that their compass is just wrong. They need to lose it, and they need to start over. And this is what the truth is.
Yeah, I mean, I sit with that, and yeah, it is a big switch from the original topic, and I I think my main thing when it comes to things like, gender or things like that, like this whole idea of masculinity and femininity, is allowing people to really like feel what they feel and experience life as they experience it.
Yes.
And where I get really passionate about it is when, like, this whole idea of, like, boys aren't supposed to cry, and you know and you know and it's and that whole idea, and the fact that, like, women are the only ones on the planet that are emotional, and things like that. I'm like, men are emotional too, like, and have emotions, and women, and it has nothing to do with gender to me at all. Like, I erase gender when it comes to that kind of thing.
Agreed.
But I think that where I get really passionate is the fact that we label, like, we have this idea that, if a guy cries in a movie, or if somebody or whatever, it's like, like, they're not strong. To me, I've now come to, like, appreciate the fact that I actually think he's really strong, if he's,
Yeah.
if he and powerful, if that doesn't, like, if he, anybody is willing to do that. It doesn't matter. But I think that's where I start to, like, get really upset with the labels and the idea that, you know, we're supposed to go around as if, no matter who it is, as if they're robots.
Yeah. And if we were teaching kids positive traits, like people are just good listeners, people are caring and loving, people will stand up for what they believe in. If we were leading with that and giving the kids an opportunity to live into practice of that sort of thing. But when you say men are this and women are that, what you've done is you've closed down a whole lot of possibilities for them. And the feelings that they're left with, which I think this is where I'm suspicious that, again, we're back in the force domain, where we've got to teach people how to behave, and we've got to train them that it's uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous to behave what would which would be a natural action for them. Now they've got to suppress that, and they've got to play through it and gloss over the grief and the no, guys, we just really need to take a minute and listen to each other. It's one of the things that I'm getting out of doing the simple questions for 100 people. I am loving getting answers to the questions from the people that are sitting there. I have no expectation, and I love that. I'm just like wide open, soaking it in. And people wow me with where they're coming from, just what feeling genuine authentic human beings they are when you give them a moment and you actually just listen to what they're saying, right?
Hmm. And then I think we underestimate, it was really interesting because one of the things I shared with you recently, by Kelly Corrigan, was on it's basically about being brave around love and everyday circumstances. And it was like, I think we underestimate even within ourselves, the simple things that we do that are really brave.
Yes.
And so I had something came up last week, and somebody that I interacted with felt like I, didn't see them. And so, so it wasn't my intention or whatever. And kind of, and so yesterday we had a conversation about it. Now, for me, it was unknown. It was a little scary. I mean, to me, I had to tap into that little element of being brave and sit there and say, okay, I've got, I could escape this and avoid this situation and possibly lose a client or friend or whatever it is, depending on the circumstance, or both.
Right.
Or I can sit there and have a conversation and hear what she has to say so she feels seen, and then be able to respond and have a conversation about this. And that required, and I think that we belittle those circumstances. And maybe if we then looked at ourselves like that more often, we would appreciate like who we are a whole lot more.
Yes.
And then I think the things about like gender and all that kind of stuff almost becomes insignificant. I feel like we're grabbing at it because people feel so unworthy or so um I don't know whether it's scared, insecure, and like small, that
Yeah.
they're looking for ways to make themselves feel larger.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
they identify with these labels because it makes them feel part of a group. It makes them feel accepted because they're a part of, quote unquote, a team. And, all of a sudden they quote unquote feel more powerful. But to me, if you can honor and respect where you are in your everyday life, which isn't necessarily easy. One of the examples she gives is like a friend of hers whose father's has Alzheimer's and comes after her with a fork. And she says, no one ever said you were going to have to love someone who was coming after you with a kitchen utensil, which is actually, kind of funny, but not funny,
Yep.
obviously. And the acts of bravery that happen, and can we celebrate that in each other? Like, and then kind of let the other stuff go. Like, is
If
really where I'm coming from now.
if we lived in a world where we were all rooting for each other, that's exactly what would happen. Okay.
Well,
There
that's
are
what I want. I want
there's
to
no
live in a world. I want to create a world, or get the world to a place where we actually
no,
celebrate those things.
there's always some buttheads that don't want to play by those rules.
That's
Okay.
fine. They cannot play by the rules. That's what I want. These are the rules of my game at this point.
Well, see, here's the thing. We live in a world culture where they've given up trying to lead people and they're just defaulting to domination, and that is the concern. I mean, pick a subject, any subject, not just gender, the whole climate change thing, COVID. Pick a subject. When the government passes laws to make behaviors illegal, they've given up on the culture, because you cannot legislate behavior. People are going to do what they're going to do. And when you make it, it's kind of like, if you come down to the fundamental, um here's another silly one. uh Canada, Toronto, in that province, they tried to pass a law making it a criminal offense with fines and jail time for not using someone's preferred pronoun. That is like, what? See, we'll take something as, when you start thinking about like something being a hate crime or a hate speech or all that kind of thing, that's going towards let's control what's coming out of your mouth. Then sooner or later you pass laws, and it cost Jordan Peterson, his seat at the University of Toronto because he fought that. He publicly went against the university policy, okay, which was whatever it was. But my point is it's back in the domination and force domain. We don't lead people anymore. We have really, really weak people in our leadership positions, and then um, the system takes over, right? It's like it would be easier if we just taught people to love each other, but we had to systematically destroy the link between good and evil that religion brought into the question. We made it impossible for people to be religious in certain countries in the world. And we're going through that right now. It's at a point where all of the folks that I talk to that are ministers, in Methodist, Lutheran, they are really not bringing young people into the fold. Most of their congregations are made up by people that are in their 50s and older that have been worshiping their entire lives. I've talked to a rabbi or anything, but I think you're probably in some cases seeing a similar thing happening, in the Jewish religion as well, except the family unit has always made it very important that if you're Jewish, you're Jewish, I mean, to the point of actually even calling it a race. I'm not sure that I identify that as being a separate race from all the other races, but it's at that level where the language has taken over and has made it impossible for people to think for themselves in many cases. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with any of that. There are good reasons to be suspicious of organized religion. There are good reasons to at least take part in the community and allow for that time out that allows you to commune with whatever you consider to be the higher power or the supreme being. And
well, I mean, I think in one other way is really the strength of community,
yes,
where, when things happen, they are there, which especially when you have the breakdown of family in some circumstances, that's vital. Like that is a lifeline for people to know
agreed.
that there's a group of people that are going to like help you out, are going to take care of your kids if you like have to go to the hospital, is gonna be there with meals and to cook dinner and all those kinds of things. So things that might have been a very family oriented, like let's say practice, all of a sudden you have a whole community of people that are willing to do that. And so in that way, I think that it's really profound that I think that, in certain sort of areas or religious groups or whatever practices, that's very, very vital and beautiful. And so I think that, it's interesting because I don't really know that. I haven't spoken to that many ministers and everything. I did speak to with somebody recently who said that actually they've had a big influx of people flocking back to religion, but I don't know what age group that was. Like I don't know how old these people were that were coming back to religion.
Yeah.
And I know that in Judaism, it's probably the same unless you go into the more religious parts, because then they have a, pretty dominant young population of people coming in because they tend to have large families. So, you know, so they have a lot of young people coming in.
So again, when it all gets stripped away, I think we can agree that our culture has now got. I mean, I blasphemed a whole lot of different things in less than 4 or 5 sentences in some people's listening, but there are some things that you can talk about in public, and there are some things that are these days that used to be fine to talk about. That's why we don't have comedians, tearing things up anymore, except for they're starting to come back out again and saying, okay, cancel me if you must, okay? But this is what I do for a living. I make people laugh. And if you don't think I'm funny, take your butt and go someplace else, please. And for a little while, you can fool people and you can dominate them. But over the long haul, the human spirit ain't going to stand for it. You and I are not going to be anybody's pawn for any longer than we absolutely have to. First, it'll annoy us. Then we'll find it tedious and okay, I'll get through this. And then after a while, it's no, I've given up a lot of my life listening to this nonsense.
Which is why I think I stopped listening to the news, because I sat there and I was like, I'm tired of hearing the stuff that's out there, and being, especially in the beginning when I was fairly, I don't want to use I just think all these issues are far more, some of them are really, complicated issues, and have a lot of complicated in the fact that there are a lot of things that need to happen and a lot of people that, like, different groups that would need to agree and that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think what ends up happening is that for some of, let's say, societal problems, there are no simple solutions. And, when I was listening to something recently, the person who was being interviewed said, sometimes we have to just agree that something served its purpose and it's now ended. Like, it can't be revived. It can't be, you know, like the mission can't be changed and it can't be come on and try to fit something else anymore.
Exactly.
Take from it what you can. So learn from it, take from it what was good, and then go out and create something new. And I feel that there are certain systems, what I know of in the United States, where I would say, and maybe probably abroad, where I think we kind of have to do that. We have to look at, say, this system as it is now is not working. And, and not try to fix a broken solution, a broken system.
Right.
Because really, to me, there is no fix. Like, you really have to start from scratch.
Agreed. Because when you first started out, it seemed like a good idea to pass a law, but now we have 600,000 of them. It's impossible to be, a legal citizen. You're always breaking the law somehow, somewhere. And the bottom line is that by obfuscating the 10 basic laws that you and I both know what they are, and about 2/3 of the population of the world shares those 10 basic laws in their teachings and in their traditions, but we've obfuscated it, and we now have made it so the charlatans, and and those people that are interested in solving something that's broken in their life by dominating other people, it's far beyond the mischief stage, and the system perpetuates itself, and it always produces the exact result that it is intended to produce. We're getting out of this system right now exactly what the people who are carrying and feeding the system want to get out of it. So, yeah, let's shut it down for a minute. Just hit the power switch and
No, I mean, I think I've, over the past few years, I've actually thought about that a lot in regard to certain things, whether that be, and I think there are certain systems, and I think what happens when you have the breakdown of a system, especially when, like you said, people have been giving directives, and basically have lost their own individual power. And I think of, when we first met for the 100 questions, I think one of my answers was I wanted to empower people to take back ownership of their own health. Like, that was that's a really important thing for me. And I think that we've seen the decline in health because people forfeit and give it away. They're like, someone else is going to fix me. I'll go to the doctor, he's going to fix me. I'll go to so and so, they're going to fix me. And really, I'm like, yes, they can help and they can give you stuff, but really, you got to fix yourself. You got to fix yourself. You got to take ownership. You got to realize what you're doing. Say, okay, this is a bad habit. This is a good habit. This is a whatever. And you have to but the minute you offer out your own power, you're lost. And now we end up with, billions of people probably all over the world who basically have done that. And now we probably have we have the probably in some ways probably have the least healthy population that has ever happened. I mean, considering the technology we have and the amount of medical interventions and inventions that we've had, which are miraculous. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they're brilliant.
Yeah, RFK, he spewed a statistic that I was not aware of, and with good reason. There's nobody who's going to tell us this while they're
Right, right.
having us stand in line at the pharmacy. But we're in the bottom 10th percentile with wellness in the world.
Yep.
And
We also have, I think,
what?
yeah, I think compared the number, one of the things I read recently was in 1953, they did a longevity scale, and I think the US ranked, I think it was 1953, ranked as 10th or 12th or something.
Yeah.
We're now 65th in 2019. I mean, that's a huge shift considering our medical, the amount of medical, interventions and, expertise we have in our country. To think that we're going backwards as far as, and so, and I think that, I didn't know that it was as low as 10%, but it doesn't surprise me as I walk around and I see, and I'm looking at just normal everyday people in my community. And I
Yeah.
look around, in my town, and I look around, especially because I live around the corner from elementary school. And so when I walk Tonka a lot in the mornings, I'll pass all these moms and dads walking their kids to school,
Yes.
or, and I would say 99% of them are overweight. And I'm not talking about obvious overweight. And I'm not talking about average build. I'm talking about
Right. Obese.
overweight, obese. And
Yeah.
I'm sitting there going when did this happen? Oh my gosh, it's so shocking to me. And this whole idea of, to me, unless you can get, yes, you can give people, I always use the animals because the animals are great. People will come to me and say, my dog has this skin issue. And so much of skin stuff and dogs and cats is related to diet. And they'll say to me, well, what can I do? And I'll say, I can tell you what to do, but you have to change their diet,
Right.
because otherwise I'm giving you something that might work, but isn't really. It's kind of like trying to put a Band-Aid on a spewing fountain, kind of thing. It's going to come up, it's not going to. So I'm I feel like that with our population, if you unless you get people to take better care of themselves, you could have all the medical interventions that you want.
Well, the funny part of it is that we live in a country that talks about science all the time, and we don't follow science. We just use it as a reason, because people aren't comfortable saying because I said so. But you go to a grocery store, the stuff that's reasonably good for you is around the outside wall. That's it.
That's it.
All the rest of that crap is there for you to spend money on to kill yourself. Okay.
When people tell me I can't afford to buy organic food or whatever, or whatever, I'll say, just shop the perimeter. Just shop the outside. That's
Absolutely.
the produce, that's the meat, that's
Whole
the
foods.
fish, that's the whole thing. And then leave whatever's in the center alone. I mean, maybe the paper goods if you want to buy paper goods. And for me, I'm a tea drinker, so I buy tea. That's the only thing I buy in the center aisles is tea.
Yeah.
But everything else to me is not doesn't come into my house, you know, and that is a conscious choice I make, you
Yes.
know. And I agree with you. Like, I mean, I try my best to buy organic if I can, but sometimes that isn't available in what I want. And sometimes, I have to look at the price, kind of thing. But mostly everything, it's not processed and not prepared
Yeah, the
already.
processing is we've lost control. We have lost the handle. Major chemical companies have paid billions of dollars to our politicians over the last 50, 60 years so they can make up names for stuff and really put garbage into our food supply. Cheapen it,
Absolutely. I mean,
whatever it is, who even knows what the long-term ramification of what these, life extenders are that they're going into. I have these brioche buns that I get from Aldi that I absolutely love. They don't go bad,
I
Jan.
know, I know. I was talking because I used to my when I was little, we had a bakery that was around the corner from us. And so
Right.
my mother used to, like, on our way home from school, we would stop by M's.
Yep.
I remember the name, and my father loved seeded rye bread. So that was really what we bought a lot of. It was seeded rye bread and maybe some other rolls or whatever. My mother baked, so we never bought the cakes and cookies and stuff. That
Yeah.
really wasn't. And I remember we would fight over the ends on the way home. Like, like there were 3 of us. So it was always like, like
The
who was
delicacy,
gonna
right?
it was yeah, and who was gonna get the ends? Because it wasn't like a loaf came with 3 ends, it only came with 2.
Did they slice it at the
Yeah,
bakery?
yeah,
Yeah. And then
they
you
did.
got that, and it's like coming out of the brown paper bag or white paper bag, and the smell, oh my God.
Exactly. So, like, we had that, but it lasted literally whatever we didn't eat, got hard in a few days and was like a rock. Like, I mean, you would bang it.
Like,
And
they
I
don't do
always
that
said
anymore.
and I always said that when bread started to last 2 weeks and milk started to last for weeks and weeks and weeks,
Right.
kinda had to pause and say, like, this is kind of intriguing to me because what are they putting in it to make it, like, so that it never mildews and that it, as far as, like, I'm sure you remember, I mean, we got milk delivered. I mean, we had a milk box on the front porch that got,
Here,
that guy delivered milk, kind of thing. And it used to, I
till
remember
our kids were in high school.
what?
Till our kids were in high school.
Yeah. And I was,
We we got orange juice. And you know what it would say on the side? It would say, ingredients, oranges.
right,
That
right,
was
right. And that was it. Exactly. And so when all of a sudden things shelf lives became longer and longer and longer, and I'm not saying that all of that was originally ill intended and all of that was, but it got to be, I think, out of control. I think it got to be, so that, like you said, it was more, maybe it became more about chemically what they could do to extend it and the fact that for whatever reason. And now, and so that's when, and then when we look at the, even if you, yeah, it's, I think that whole system, I agree with you, is a mess. I mean, unless we take personal responsibility and we don't let it in to the best of our ability, then, some of it maybe we don't have much control over because, depending on whether you can get, milk and how much it's processed and things like that. And in certain states, the rules change. But some of it we definitely can kind of, like I said, take ownership of and say, my kids aren't going to get this long as I can, as long as I'm able to control what they're eating. Once they reach a certain age, it's kind of like they're out of the house. And then you really, then it's harder.
Well, you were talking about, noticing general um, increase in endomorphs, and not the lean sort of population that Kennedy was envisioning. And if you stop and think about when all the things started going south, it was on a timeline. We had several things that all happened at the same time.
Hmm.
And one of them was the interstate system went in where it divided cities and neighborhoods from each other. They're on a different size of a 4 lane or 6 lane highway. And people that used to walk a block and spend the day with their friend would now have to walk a mile, to get to wherever they could cross and get on the other side. And then, that was started by Eisenhower, and the real effect of it was very much in place in the late 1960s. And then they displaced all of these people from those inner city neighborhoods. And many were of color, but many of them were poor white people. There were people of Polish and Russian and German and French and Irish, and these people got pushed into projects, and people don't remember that all happening, because when the projects were first built, they built these monoliths that are 30 stories tall. And what did they think crushing all those people into such tiny space was going to end up doing? Well, over time, they if you have studied the concentric theory of cities, poor people always end up getting pushed out of the center of the city after a while, and wind up being out, on the edges of the city. And so at the same time, now you've created this barrier to people getting jobs, being able to get to and from work. If you've got 10,000 people that are living in a project that has 4 of these skyscrapers, um, how are you going to get them to and from anywhere? So then you get them dependent on drugs, and then you give them just enough money, to buy really crappy food. Um, there's no more farmers market that they go down to. Do you remember when people used to shop every day? They
Hmm.
get up, 5:30 in the morning. They go to the market. They get what they need. They bring it back home. Then the rest of the day would go.
Well, I mean, having lived in Manhattan for a long time, that is something that you kind of becomes a part of your life, because one is, so many people don't have cars, so you can only carry a limited amount of groceries because it weighs a lot. There's stuff that's heavy, so all of a sudden you tend to shop more often. And also, I mean, in my apartment, I had like, I mean, I didn't have a college fridge, but I had a like mini fridge and freezer. So it didn't hold a whole lot of food.
Right.
So there was only a limited amount of space of food that you could, let's say, that needed to be refrigerated or frozen. Whether that for me at the time was buying meat, because I was buying meat, kosher meat, and that was, and I would store it. I only had a limited amount of space to do that. So I was like, oh, okay, well, so my diet was altered because of that. But I think the other thing that you didn't mention that I think was a huge, and I'm not being critical of any sort of like of this, but I think the other thing that happened in parallel with the change and was, and I'm for all for women's lib, was women going out into the workforce. And then all of a sudden, you know, they were being asked to do double or triple of the amount, because they wasn't like gave up being homemakers. Like, especially in the beginning, a lot of, women who worked had families and, continued to have that whole home life,
Yeah.
where all of a sudden, you know, they had to figure out how they were going to like get dinner on the table if they were working, 10 hours a day or 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And so I think that that was the other transition that happened, um, was the increase in, in that. And yes, I'm like all for it. And I think, I believe, but that in some, I just love it. And that's who I was. I was very involved in my career and was really happy to be there. But I think there were things that happened societally. The fact that, in general, it wasn't common that um, men took up the slack in that kind of gap, let's say. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, now I know people who are stay-at-home dads, but when it first happened I don't think I knew one stay-at-home dad, so I mean, I think that's some of it too. Um, I think there are a few other things that came to mind, which just I have to think about, which I think were also very dynamic in this whole shift of, when you talked about highways, I wasn't even friends. I mean, people were separated from their families. So you have the whole disintegration of the familial unit and the
Yep.
fact that, even if you didn't see family members every day, like my mother talks about this.
Yep.
But every weekend, like all the cousins would get together and all the aunts and uncles would come together and everybody would meet at that time my mother grew up in Westchester and everybody else lived in like maybe some of the boroughs kind of thing.
Yep.
And so she said everybody would quote unquote come to the country. And that was their house because they lived in Westchester, kind of thing. And but it was all the aunts and uncles and all the great aunts and uncles who lived locally and all the first cousins, and everybody would come every Sunday. And that was just that whole very strong familial tie where, and then also there was the whole breakdown of like mealtime. Like when I grew up, I remember every day, we were all at dinner. It was like very rarely you know, was that whole kind of mealtime that didn't happen,
Yeah.
especially when we were kids. It was like when we were, let's say, below 13 or 12. I don't remember having, unless one of us happened to be sleeping over at somebody else's house or having dinner at somebody else's house. It was always like we were all together.
Yep.
So we were having those conversations. We were like, all those kinds of things, which hopefully having those conversations or at least being all together, depending on how open your family was or whatever, but that was happening. So I think there were a number of things that kind of deteriorated all around the same time, or pretty much around the same time.
Yeah. We basically watched all of our institutions become monoliths, and get in bed with the government. I mean, education, insurance industry, pharmaceuticals, on and on and on and on. That essentially what we watched was, more kids went to college, and after they got out of high school, there weren't jobs locally that could, pay them the salaries that they needed in order to support a family. And then we got into the situation where you really had to have two incomes in order to survive as a family unit. And then we went from a period of time before the 1950s. I think divorce was like 10% of people that got married got divorced in a lifetime. And then during the 1950s and 60s, that jumped up to 25% would get divorced. And within the next 15 or 20 years, 3 out of 4 would get divorced, 75%. And those who got divorced and remarried were likely to average 3 future spouses. Okay. That people who got divorced the first time would, on average, get married twice more. And I haven't updated these statistics now, but now we're to the point where we got a whole generation. They just don't want to get married.
Mm-hmm.
We've made that into such a farcical situation, with how much people are spending on that day, and so there's just so much mixed message out there at this point. And you can sit down with people and they will know what is good and right and regular and decent. And then you'll ask them, are they doing it? And they'll say, why would I do it? I'll be the only one. If they're not going to, if they're not going to arrest criminals, then why would I be worried about that? Can you imagine? I don't know. I may be a little bit older than you are, but pot was not legal after 1970, in Denver, Colorado. It was a parking fine. Okay, it was a misdemeanor, and it didn't get to be the heinous crime that it was until I think 1973 or 74, the Nixon legislation that was getting back at all the hippies uh, who were so awful to him when he was running in 72. Um, so the point is that it's now legal everywhere, and people are finding it easier to do business with drug dealers than it is with the states where they're charging so much tax on legal cannabis and that sort of thing. And we're having so many people who are meeting their demise by accident, you know. And we've been told that it's one and done with fentanyl. In some cases maybe it is, but for most people it stays in your system, and it builds up to a point where your body finally says, I can't do this anymore, and stops. And so all we're talking about here is this whole thing, the 600,000 laws that nobody enforces, or it gets randomly enforced, in different parts of the country with different people in different times, right? And the food, the what are we teaching our children, the all of it. We don't have a quality control, function that's saying this isn't working. Can we just stop? Can we just stop this for a minute?
Absolutely. I mean, I look at all the things that, and I think that some of it is information and people don't understand like the impact of what they do necessarily. Like some of the choices they make. I don't really know that they understand or they're well informed about the choices that are just the choices or information around. So I'm thinking of I'm thinking of this because I'm on a panel talking about breast health online a week from Friday.
Yeah.
Not about breast cancer, about breast health. So
Right.
different, so we're talking. And so one of the things that, the more work I do, and everybody has always said, breastfeeding is better, which is pretty much true.
Okay.
Whether it be immunity and carotenoids or antioxidants that are passed over. But then it also has the literature says that there also is a decreased risk in breast cancer for women who breastfeed. Now, I don't know that people are ever told those things.
I didn't
Like,
know that that was a thing.
yeah. And so I'm like, would women make a different choice as far as either using a breast pump or trying to breastfeed more? And I don't know, but it's just a question that I have. Like, would people make the same choices if they had all the information?
Well,
And
let's
and
try giving them all the information and see what happens,
see what happens exactly. And it might be not possible for them because there are women who don't produce much breast milk because for a
Right.
baby depending on the size, and there are circumstances where for whatever, which I'm sure. But how would what would happen if you gave women all those choices and said, okay, this is what's out there, this is what's known, now go back, think about it, over the next series of months, and come to a decision for yourself of what you think is best for you.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that we're just sometimes people, yes, we don't know what we don't know. And so could we let people know? I know, really profound, right? We don't know what we don't know.
Well, see, that's something that most people don't realize. They think they know everything they know.
That's right. That's right. But I've had to look at things mistakes I've made, like in not trying to do anything bad, but just for years taking calcium supplements and then realizing that the calcium supplements that I was taking, there was a difference between calcium supplements
Yes.
and it wasn't like they were all the same. And then I read a study about how certain poor quality calcium supplements contain mercury. And I was like, because it comes from fish that have mercury contamination. And I was like, Oh, here I thought I was doing a really great thing, but you don't know what you don't know. And I had to kind of let it go and say, okay, well, from now on, I'll make a different choice. But, so just like trying to give people more information
Yeah.
to make better choices.
Yep. And unfortunately, that's another system that is totally corrupt and absolutely, because of their involvement with the federal government, there have been studies by high-priced pharmaceuticals, vitamins, and that sort of thing that are faked, that say that there are lesser brands and store brands contain contaminants. Okay, and they're allowed to publish these things for years, and as soon as they are called on it and they remove those, they do more studies that say the same thing.
Well, it always makes me laugh because I remember one of the first things I heard, and this was actually broadcast, I think, or maybe I read it, and it said, not safe if you're pregnant. And I thought to myself, well, if it's not safe when you're pregnant, why would it be safe if you're if you're not pregnant? Like it just didn't make sense to me. Like just because I'm not pregnant, that doesn't mean I should care that I'm getting this exposure. Like it didn't make sense to me. If it's unsafe, it's unsafe. Like it just, and it was just so funny when I heard it originally. It was like, well, these levels are okay as long as you're not pregnant. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I don't know if I want to even take that in. Like, I would just prefer not to have it. Thank you.
We'll see. And there's also a and this kind of comes all the way full circle back to where we were starting from. That when I hear experts talking to each other using jargon that I can't understand, there's a part of me that immediately just gets a little suspicious. And it's hard work to hang in a conversation for me that I don't have the language or am able to transpose different words in order for it to be meaningful for me, to where I
Mhm.
could actually what I mean when I understand something, I can recreate the conversation for somebody else that wasn't there in my words, right? So what we keep coming back around to is you pick a domain and there's just like this layer of nonsense everywhere. And I am with you. I think it makes no sense in the world uh, to turn on any broadcast where people are trying to tell us what's going on in the world, unless it's people, firsthand accounts of what they actually saw. Um, and it's to the point now where it takes so few people to mess with everything. You think about, like, for instance, and I'm going to close with this, but my point is that people, um, here's it's a study. It was a poll that was done. The most trusted voice on cable news is Fox. Believe it or not, the most trusted voice. They're talking heads, opinion shows. That's not news. But the news team, their straight news team, they are the most trusted to be fair and balanced, according to this study. And they get somewhere between 1,000,002 to 1,000,007 viewers daily. Walter Cronkite had 65 million people tuning in every single day. People are not believing any of these nonsense talking heads anymore. They're getting their news someplace else on the internet. Some guy, I mean, Ken used to say he got all his information off of TikTok.
Mhm.
You know, and it's like, wow, no wonder we can't find things to agree on with facts, because there's so many different variations of the same information, and they're quite different. I mean, to the point of being mutually exclusive, they just don't make any sense. So,
Well, I think what happens is that, as we've learned, especially when we start to peruse, when you get into stuff like, and I don't know a whole lot about this, like algorithms and things like that, where basically people are fed information based on
yep,
what they like. So they're only, so everything is really skewed toward, what they want and basically what they believe anyway. You know, like, you know what I mean? And so all of a sudden, you know, and as you're fed that all the time, you really believe that there's only one side to everything.
Yeah.
Like there's only one side, and there's not even like, and you become so entrenched in that one side, there's no space for anything else. Like there's no space at all.
Right.
And, you know, it's so, and that might be also my hesitation of like getting too entrapped in that whole news media thing, is that I want to be able to live my life about like I said, like what feels right to me, what, you know, based on my values of what I hold as important, you know, love, kindness, compassion, you know, being a good person. Those are my values, you know, hugging the people I love, you know, those are my values, you know, like, and I want to like, and I, maybe I'm living in like a la la land, you know, oblivion
I'm
land.
right next to you. I am right there.
But I feel like, I think that I'm almost afraid of being like corrupted, I guess is a good word, by
Nothing wrong with
all the nonsense
that. Yeah.
that just kind of like, you know, yeah.
Well, I guess it's time for us to tie this up in a pretty bow.
Oh my gosh, a pretty bow. Oh my gosh.
This, you know, the free form kind of going all over the place. It's really in what I would like to see happen is for people to get to have more questions. And when you were talking earlier about a behavior that happens, and then afterwards you start thinking about, well, why did I do this? And what was that all about? Wouldn't it be really cool if we could be taught how to have something happen, ask those questions, and then act?
Mm-hmm.
You know, where the responsibility is the understanding of what just happened, as opposed to immediately reacting and then kind of regretting it sometimes if it didn't go well.
Absolutely.
Well, the bow is, I appreciate you and I love you. And to all of our listeners, I appreciate and love you too. We can't wait to hear from you. Just let us know what's going on in your life. And Jan, would you like to send us off?
Oh, just, you know, I think I'd like to send us off like how you always end us like off, Bill. Is like, go out and reach out to someone, you know, make sure that you recognize those everyday acts of bravery that you have, that you do, and, you know, go out and be the best version of yourself you can be.
Amen. We're,
Amen.
we're lighting the candle, a world that works. And by the way, the world does work. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.